I remember hearing early on in the war from Russian state-owned media that Zelenskyy was illegitimate, that they would never negotiate with him, and in particular that they should hold elections. I don't remember exactly when I first came across this, but it must have been within the first year, so it was some time ago. Then I heard again that he was illegitimate because they didn't hold elections in 2024. Yeah, right. I assumed this would be the kind of unboiled spaghetti that would never stick. I mean, what sort of idiot would buy this nonsense? Oh, alright. So, suddenly there was a whole bunch of idiots that were directly parroting Russian propaganda. Specifically, the claims were, or I guess the claims are, that Zelenskyy is a dictator, that he cancelled elections in 2024, and that his approval rating is 4%. Well, according to polls, his approval rating is not 4%, but there's an interesting point to note here. Note that the 4% claim is not just claiming a specific value, but it implicitly claims that we can know the approval rating. Note that this is different from claiming that some higher number is bogus, because we can't know, because, I don't know, the country is so corrupt and oppressive that polling is infeasible, or whatever. So we agree that we can know, at least approximately, and we only disagree about the actual number. And then the question is, how did you get the number? What's your source? And I know what the Russians are saying, so I'm pretty sure I know where these people are getting their information. And if you check the video description, I have several sources, and one of them is Fox News. Now, I included that one because Fox News has a certain reputation, and they basically get the facts right, and they get the numbers right. They might present it from a certain angle, but basically it's all there, including the admission that Russia would probably take advantage of the opportunity to interfere. So basically what I'm saying is, even Fox News pretty much gets it right. Now, why it doesn't make any sense to hold elections under these circumstances has been explained so many times, and having to debunk this feels as silly as debunking flat Earth, but I guess it hasn't worked. So here we go again. First off, it's illegal, and it's illegal for good reason, and I'll get back to those reasons. But whatever those reasons are, it's an important fact that it is illegal, and in particular that Tulsi Gabbard's claim that elections had been cancelled is just false. It's illegal because of the war, because of the state of emergency, that there's martial law. So as soon as Russia invaded, having elections was never on the table in the first place. The next point is that this is normal. This is not strange. This is not because Ukraine is corrupt or because Zelenskyy is a dictator and he has strange, weird rules so that he doesn't have to have elections. As basically everyone has pointed out, Britain didn't hold elections during the Second World War, and again, for good reason. Third, according to polls, rather than Russian propaganda, Zelenskyy is relatively popular. I mean, it's been going up and down, of course. He started out great, then it went down, then the invasion happened and everyone rallied around him and it went back up, then it went back down, then he was called a dictator, so it went back up again. But it's certainly nowhere near 4%. Also, the political opposition came out multiple times in support of Zelenskyy. They did it way back when this first came up, when the Russians were talking about it. And it came up again now, when the Americans started talking about it. So apparently, not even the political opposition thinks now would be a good time to hold elections. And just to be sure, the parliament even held a vote, where they basically agreed to keep their constitution the way it is. Okay, so why is holding an election now ridiculous? What about all the people who fled the country and are now refugees in other places? What about the soldiers in the trenches? Do you go and collect their votes, or do you have to move soldiers back and forth between the front just for voting? I mean, they do rotate already, so do you let them vote when they come back from the front to recover? In that case, the election could take quite some time. What about everyone still living in the occupied territories? Are you gonna ask the Russians to let them vote? Or how's that supposed to work? And who's gonna vote? Who is where? Who's even alive? How can you make sure that it's safe and secure and transparent and reliable? And what about Russian interference? And who has time for campaigning and debating? Seriously? And then you're going to have a change in administration in the middle of a war. It just doesn't add up. It doesn't make any sense. It's not just that it's awkward and people are kind of busy. It would be difficult or close to impossible to make sure that it's a proper, free and democratic election. And it's weird that someone would think that this would be a good idea, that this does make sense. In particular, that it would make sense in order to uphold democracy. So I have no idea what these people have in mind, how they're imagining that you could have meaningful elections during a war. It suggests a strange view of what democracy and elections mean. I call it cargo cult democracy. It turns out that I'm not the first to draw this kind of parallel. Richard Feynman once talked about cargo cult science, and here's what he said. In the South Seas, there is a cargo cult of people. During the war, they saw airplanes with lots of good materials, and they want the same thing to happen now. So they've arranged to make things like runways, to put fires along the sides of the runways, to make a wooden hut for a man to sit in, with 2 wooden pieces on his head for headphones, and bars of bamboo sticking out like antennas. He's the controller, and they wait for the airplanes to land. They're doing everything right. The form is perfect. It looks exactly the way it looked before. But it doesn't work. No airplanes land. So I call these things cargo cult science, because they follow the apparent precepts and forms of scientific investigation. But they're missing something essential, because the planes don't land. So the point is that you're mimicking some surface level details with no understanding of the actual mechanism. And we can come up with all kinds of analogies for this. I noticed this cargo cult democracy already when Russia was holding referendums, annexing the 4 partially occupied oblasts. It's weird that they didn't recognize any of those problems I mentioned. That's right, I said partially. That little detail didn't seem to bother them either. Well, Russia is known for being highly democratic, so I guess they know what they're doing, right? I mean, look, they even use transparent boxes, and transparency is good, right? That sounds democratic. So I guess modeling our policies on them as an example is probably a great idea.